Hello, and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the story of 3 generations of the Bentley family from Canada. In the summer of 1982, the Bentley and Johnson families were busy planning a 2-week camping trip to the beautiful Wells Grey Provincial Park. Wells Grey is a large wilderness park located in British Columbia in Canada that covers over 1.3 million square acres. 66-year-old George Bentley and his wife Edith, who was 59, were experienced campers who had been to the park many times. On this particular occasion, they would be accompanied by their 40-year-old daughter, Jackie Johnson, and Jackie's husband, Bob Johnson, together with Jackie and Bob's daughters, 13-year-old Janet and 11-year-old Karen. On the 2nd of August 1982, George and Edith packed up their Ford camper truck together with their 12-foot aluminium boat and travelled to meet Jackie, Bob and the girls, who had travelled in their beige 1979 Plymouth Caravelle. The family wanted to enjoy the serenity of the nature and picked a secluded, picturesque spot at Bear Creek to set up camp. 4 days later, on the 6th of August 1982, the family were in contact with other family members and friends. It was the last time they were ever heard from. On the 16th of August, Bob was scheduled to return to work at Gorman Brothers Lumber in West Bank, West Kelowna, where he had worked for over 25 years. When he didn't show up, his colleagues started to get concerned as this was completely out of character. On the 23rd of August, Bob's manager called the police to report that Bob was missing. A search followed, which predominantly centred on the area near Wells Grey Provincial Park. However, there was no sign of the family. As time passed, the police began to fear the worst. Details of the missing family had been made public, and on the 13th of September 1982, a mushroom picker reported a burned-out car near Battle Mountain Road, north of the town of Clearwater. The car matched the description of Bob and Jackie's car, the 1979 Plymouth Caravelle. Battle Mountain Road is a remote gravel road between Clearwater and the Wells Grey Park. The car was found in dense bush around 30 metres off of the road. It had been set alight, seemingly with some kind of accelerant in order to intensify the fire. On the back seat of the car, within piles of ash, were bone fragments, which were initially thought to belong to 2 people, most likely Bob and Jackie, but it was later established that the bones belonged to the 4 adults: George, Edith, Jackie and Bob. In the boot of the car, the burnt skeletal remains of the 2 young sisters were found. Everyone's worst fears had been realised, as it was confirmed that the police were now hunting a murderer. From the evidence found in and around the car, it was established that the family members had been killed elsewhere. They had all been shot with a .22 caliber weapon before being driven to Battle Mountain Road and set alight. The police needed to find the missing Ford camper and the murder site. They were subsequently contacted by a park ranger who had seen a camper matching the description of the Bentleys, which had been parked up at Bear Creek the previous month. Upon investigation of the area, the police found some empty beer cans of the same brand that Bob would drink, but more importantly, 6 spent shell casings. However, there was still no sign of the Ford camper, the family's camping equipment, or their boat. The investigation continued, but despite the best efforts of everyone who was involved, little progress was being made. The police decided to work with the media to keep the information in the public eye. A reenacted crime scene that included details of the missing camper was aired throughout Canada. The police received thousands of leads, including various sightings of the camper van across Canada. One in particular stood out. A waitress told the police that she had seen the van in central Canada. It was being driven by 2 scruffy-looking French-Canadian men and was heading east. The police began tracking what they believed to be the murderer's route across the country, and photo fits were released to the press. In May 1983, the police started to drive a replica of the Bentley's 1981 camper across the country. There were signs attached to the sides of the camper asking for information in the hope that this may jog someone's memory and uncover new evidence. However, a year after the Bentley and Johnsons went missing, the case still remained unsolved. The summer of 1983 was one of the worst ever for tourism in the Wells Grey Park. On Canada Day holiday weekend that year, people were being advised not to travel to British Columbia campgrounds as they were all full. The exception to that was Wells Grey, where just 18 of the 105 sites were occupied. The population in the nearby town of Clearwater, which was around 7,000 at the time of the murders, was understandably deeply affected by what had happened and the fact that the culprit had not been brought to justice. A breakthrough came on the 18th of October 1983. 2 forestry workers found the missing camper van on an abandoned logging road on Trophy Mountain. It was just a few miles from where the Johnsons' burnt-out car had been found the year before. The police were criticised for going on what was seen as a costly and unnecessary chase across the country when the camper was found so close to the area that they had been searching. In reality, the van was on the opposite side of a mountain and was hidden deeply within the forest, making it near impossible to see. This discovery reinforced a previous theory that the killer was likely to be a local due to their knowledge about these remote dirt roads. The camper had a bullet hole in one of the doors and, similar to the Johnsons' car, had been set alight to destroy any potential evidence. It was lifted out of the forest by helicopter before being taken on a flatbed truck to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Crime Lab in Vancouver. The police conducted door-to-door inquiries in Clearwater for the second time. This time they received some crucial information. A resident told them that a year earlier a local man, 24-year-old David William Shearing, had inquired about how to re-register a Ford van and repair a hole in its door. David was born in 1959 to William and Rose Shearing. He had a brother who was a sheriff, and his father, who was a prison guard, had died from cancer in March 1982, 5 months before the murders. At the time of the murders, David lived in one of the nearest houses to where they had taken place. In November 1983, David was questioned by Sergeant Michael Eastham and Constable Ken Liebel. Initially, David believed that he was being questioned about a hit and run that had taken place in the area 2 years earlier. A teenager, Dave Carter, was hit by a car and killed. David confessed to this crime during the interview, claiming that the boy was passed out drunk in the road and that he hadn't stopped or come forward at the time because he didn't want his mum to know. The interviewing officers carefully moved on to the subject of the murders, and as they were talking, David mentioned Bear Creek in the interview, despite this location not being public knowledge at the time. Realising his mistake, David went on to confess to all 6 murders. He handed over some of the family's possessions and gave the police the murder weapon that had been hanging on a wall in his house. David stated that on the 10th of August 1982, he had seen the victims at their campsite and decided to rob them. He shot all 4 adults as they sat around the campfire and then shot the 2 young girls as they slept in their tent. He then loaded their bodies into the car, drove it to Battle Mountain Road and set it on fire using 5 gallons of petrol as an accelerant. He then returned to the campsite, cleaned up and stole the Ford camper, returning with it to his property. He then dumped and burned the camper at a later date when he found out that it was difficult to re-register and that there was so much attention being drawn to it throughout the police investigation. He was charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder. This was eventually reduced to 6 counts of second-degree murder as part of a plea deal that the prosecutor agreed to due to uncertainty surrounding whether David's confession would be admissible in court. David was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. This was the maximum penalty for second-degree murder at that time, and the first time in Canadian history that the maximum penalty had been handed out. Each prison term would run concurrently, meaning he would be eligible for parole in 2008. The law has now changed, and if he was sentenced today, the terms would run consecutively, resulting in him not being eligible for parole for 150 years. During all of the interviews and prosecution, investigating officers never believed David's motive to be robbery. After his conviction was finalised, David was re-interviewed by Sergeant Michael Eastham, who got the full truth behind the murders. At this point, David admitted that he had spotted the family when they had set up camp and spent several days spying on them from a hillside before he approached them on August the 10th. Whilst the 4 adults were sitting around the campfire, he crept into the campsite and opened fire, killing all 4 of them. He then put the 4 bodies into the family's car before hiding the car in the woods. David then took 13-year-old Janet and 11-year-old Karen to his house. They were then subjected to undescribable things for the following week. On the 16th of August, he took Karen back to the campsite and shot her in the back of the head, before doing the same to Janet the following day. He hid the 2 girls' bodies in the boot of the car before driving the vehicle containing all 6 bodies, 4 of which that had been decomposing for a week in the heat of summer, up to the mountain where he set it alight. The severity of the crimes that he committed shocked all of those involved with the investigation, as well as those from the small district of Clearwater. Even so, whilst in prison in 1993, he met a lady by the name of Heather, who he would go on to marry in 1995. Heather believes that he is full of remorse and struggles to see how the man she knows could ever hurt anyone. She believes that he deserves a second chance, although many people would furiously disagree. In September 2008, David, who was by now using his mother's maiden name of Ennis, was eligible for parole. The National Parole Board ruled that he still had violent sexual fantasies and had not completed sex offender treatment and was not ready for freedom. Similarly, his second application in 2012 was also rejected. He is eligible to reapply for parole every 2 years. In 2014 he applied again, but withdrew his request a month before the hearing when a petition with around 15,000 signatures was presented to the National Parole Board urging them not to release David. Family members of the victims appealed for relief from the agony of reliving the tragedy and campaigning against his release every 2 years. In September 2021, David was once again denied parole due to it being assessed that he still presents a risk to society. That concludes today's story. Please click like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Please add any comments down below. As always, I'll be interested in reading them. And here's to a brand new year. 2022 is here. If you have time to check, please look in the video section just to see that you're bang up to date with all of the latest videos. There were quite a few released in December. As always, thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. The lead investigating officer, Sergeant Mike Eastham, co-authored a book about this case. It's called The Seventh Shadow. Goodbye.